So let's do this while Z is working out his sound issues. What I'd like to do is have Dr. Autry and Mr. Gold, both of you, just tell a little bit about yourselves, et cetera, what you do, who you're with, and just give yourself a quick bio.
I'm Greg Autry. I am a clinical professor of space leadership, business, and policy with the Thunderbird School of Global Management at ASU, a position I just started last week and am super excited about. Before that, I spent 20 years teaching and researching the commercial space industry. And in between, I've had the opportunity to serve my government on the ComStack for the last 3 years. I'm currently chair of the safety working group there and the committee that advises FAA on rulemaking and other activities in commercial space launch and reentry. I served on the NASA agency review team the last go round in 2016, and I'm proud I helped set some of the current agenda in space, which the current administration has indicated they're going to continue, and which Mr. Mike Gold in particular had the opportunity to extend and execute on with much excellence. As you might know, I was nominated to be CFO of NASA last year, but due to the dysfunction of hashtag 2020 politics, the Senate never found an opportunity to vote on my nomination. Thank you.
So like Greg, we're all starting new jobs. I'm now a veteran of almost 3 days at Redwire Space. I was incredibly excited to join the company, where I serve as Executive Vice President for Civil Space Business Development and External Affairs. Prior to that, as Greg mentioned, I was most recently Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships at NASA, and prior to that, the Acting Associate Administrator for the Office of International and Interagency Relations. And compliments to Greg, as he mentioned, they were setting a very bold and commercial course. So we were standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think did some wonderful things relative to partnerships, both domestic and international, via the Artemis Accords and the Gateway MOUs during my tenure at NASA. Prior to that, I was Vice President for Civil Space at Maxar Technologies, and also served as General Counsel for Maxar's old Radiant Solutions business unit. Before that, I spent 13 years at Bigelow Aerospace, where I oversaw anyway the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 launch campaigns, and was part of a NASA team award for the Bigelow Expandable Activity Module. And before that, I was with law firms of both Patton Boggs, and prior to that, McGuire Woods. Yes, I am a recovering attorney. And I served on the ComStack as chair from 2012 to 2019. I was also the first chair of the Regulatory and Policy Committee of the NASA Advisory Council.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I have conquered the technical issues. In typical NASA fashion, I have a backup for my backup. So, you know, we're good to go now. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, David, for fielding it. You know, it's really great to follow up on the previous panel with this conversation, given that both of you gentlemen have worked around the commercialization of space, often hopping back and forth from government to non-government to industry. It's a really exciting time, as we just heard. You know, Intuitive Technology Machines, for example, is planning, you know, commercial landing on the moon. What an amazing world we live in today. And as you alerted to, Mike, you know, in the last 4, maybe even in the last 15 years, in many ways, NASA has been moving towards increasing amounts of partnerships with commercial entities and international partners. And so I would like to kind of first start off with just asking perhaps about that, and where you see, where have we come from, and where do you see this evolving to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we came from a place that was all government owned and operated. I like to draw the contrast in particular between the Apollo and the Artemis program. And we all, of course, applaud and honor the incredible accomplishments of Apollo. But there was no commercial space sector, at least not like we know it today. So now underneath Artemis, you've got literally private-public partnerships bringing the astronauts to the surface of the moon via the Human Landing System program. We'll be sending cargo to the Gateway, an orbital outpost around the moon via public-private partnerships. And we've seen not only cargo be delivered to the International Space Station by commercial entities, but now crew. So there has just been a paradigm shift relative to the capabilities, the existence of, and the robust nature of these commercial partnerships that have greatly benefited government. And I applaud NASA and Greg and everyone who's come before me and who are now coming after me. And this has been bipartisan, by the way. This has been continuity in terms of supporting the commercial sector. And it's really led to the US being the envy of many nations relative to the dynamism that we have. And what I'm so excited about is now when the government spends money, and I think you heard this from Bucky in your previous panel as well, not only are you succeeding in meeting a mission need for the government, but you're always wanting to create a new dynamic economy, more jobs, more private sector opportunities with it. So it's amazing to see. And then along with that is the proliferation of space agencies.
Oh, I think we
Well, I'm
lost
going to
Mike for a
jump in
moment
here.
there. Yeah, good call.
So one of the things I'd like to point out that Mike alluded to is that you've got a, oh, Mike, I see you're back. Do you want to continue your point?
Oh, I was nearly at the end anyway. Let me just say that the new energy that we're getting from these space agencies that have developed globally, that are participating in Artemis, which will be the largest, broadest, most diverse human space exploration beyond North Orbit Coalition in history. It's terrific to bring these new entrants like United Arab Emirates, all of the wonderful things, although it's a very established program. India is doing amazing new things, as well as our traditional partners in Japan, Europe, Canada, et cetera. So there's never been a more global time, never been a larger time for public-private partnerships, and I really think we're just beginning. So with that, over to you, Greg.
Right. I just want to follow up on Mike's point and hit the key difference between Artemis and Apollo. And Artemis's goal is to create a sustainable presence on the moon. When back when we were on the agency review team, that was our primary underlying mission, and sustainable is key. And you can't do sustainable without this broad level of support from commercial and international partners. We've demonstrated that on the International Space Station. Frankly, if NASA hadn't stepped up and done COTS, which initiated during the George W. Bush administration and was supported under the Obama administration, and had international partners, the space station would have had to been abandoned when the shuttle retired or shortly afterwards. The Russians began to have some issues with their launch vehicles, both Progress and Soyuz, and luckily we had commercial partners to step up. Commercial partners had problems though. Orbital ATK blew up on the pad in 2014. SpaceX had a launch failure in flight in 2015, but it was the combination of all these systems that allowed us to solve the problem. We had infrastructure and capabilities. So Orbital was able to stick their capsule on a ULA Atlas rocket and do a resupply mission. SpaceX was there when they were needed and got back in the play quickly. But if we didn't have that mix of capabilities, we wouldn't have been able to supply the station. Going forward with commercial crew, it's the same thing. One of the things I've always fought for is we had to have two commercial crew companies. It's not all about one company, because if you only have one way to get people down from somewhere, then that's going to be limited to these test pilot folks who know they're putting their lives on the line. But if we're going to have a sustainable space economy, put folks on the moon, there's got to be more than one way to get them back. So what I saw going on with HLS, going back to Doug Lavero and the way he approached that with three different vendors with three very different solutions, that's fantastic, because I would feel comfortable being on the moon, right? I'm comfortable being on the moon because we're going to have Gateway there, and we're going to have the ability to go directly back to Earth if we want. It's not an either or solution. And the folks that want to narrow it down to the Apollo model of a programmatic single vendor solution where NASA designs every component, and there's just a whole series of single points of failure that you have to throw hundreds of thousands of people at to make sure that doesn't occur, is not the solution for a vibrant space economy. Today we're doing it right, and I'm so excited to see it. Thank you, Mike, for your portion of that, particularly bringing in the important international partners.
So speaking of international partners, and maybe I can just stay with you, Greg, for a minute. can you talk about and perhaps provide your perspective, particularly from kind of, you are a professor of business and economics and commerce. Can you provide your perspective on what this sea or space change is enabling in terms of commercial activity, and how you see that evolving? I mean, again, we've heard this morning some great information about how the venture capital sector views this and where they see the opportunities. But sometimes, we've also seen that there are interesting ebbs and flows in that, whether it was gene editing 10 years ago, or nanotechnology 15 to 17 years ago. There are these flows now. Hopefully space is much more like the internet, where it creates its own economy. And could you comment on that, on those concepts?
Sure. I'm going to be honest. There is a big if we build it, they will come component to the space dream. And Mike and I, sorry to speak for you, Mike, are guilty of that, right? But there's true believers. I think the true believers in space are even stronger than the ones in nanotech or biotech, for instance. This is going to happen. Will we see setbacks, and might we be, for instance, seeing a bubble in several portions of the space sector? Yeah, I think so. Do we have too many small launch companies coming up? For sure, right? That's fine though, because when you see some of those companies fail, and we've already seen a couple of reboots, Vector, for instance, is in a reboot, they don't go away, all right? The technology they developed, the people that they trained and brought on board simply move to another company and can continue to contribute to the growing economy. So I'm not too worried about that. The long-term promise of space to solve the real problems that we have on Earth is just undeniable, and that's, in the end, is the fundamental driver. We are not going to solve our climate problems. We're not going to solve our conflict problems or our limited resource problems here on Earth inside the box. That just never happens. And I've been disappointed, frankly, to see some progressive thought leaders recently step up and try to suggest that spending money on space is a mistake because we need to solve those problems here on Earth. The point of spending money in space is to solve those problems here on Earth. And we're going forward, we're doing that. The commercial partners and international partners stepping up are huge. And the thing I like best that makes me feel that we've really done it well, particularly on the regulatory side in the United States, is the fact that companies and investors all over the world are coming to the United States to fund an industry. Every other industry in the United States is like, how quick can we get out of the American regulatory and tax environment in order to do our production somewhere else? But here you've got companies from New Zealand opening factories. In California, you've got folks from the Ukraine funding investment in factories in Austin, Texas. You've got folks from the UAE working with a UK company, to build a vehicle that's going to fly out of New Mexico and is built in California. This is a very different thing, and it's only happening in space because the American government has done policy really, really well. And as Mike noted, in a bipartisan way over several administrations and Congresses. It's been messy as heck, and a lot of people just complain about the details, but the overall result looks damn good.
And if I can just chime in on that, I believe,
yeah,
I'm just going to say, I believe so much in space manufacturing, the potential for microgravity research development to revolutionize a number of economic fields here on Earth. I voted with my feet and joined Redwire, and certainly one of the leading Redwire companies is Made in Space, which has printers up on the ISS now, manufacturing systems, crystallization systems now on the ISS that, as Greg points out, will not only enable a bold future in space to be able to manufacture tools or medicines, et cetera, to enable exploration, but dramatically improve life here on Earth with new fiber optics, with new medicines, even growing ligaments and eyes. There's all kinds of incredible biological applications that we're seeing. And not only is the civil space and government exploration international because it's so difficult. It demands sharing of risk, sharing of costs, and that's what the Artemis Accords and the Gateway MOUs were all about. But here in the private sector, it's inherently commercial. As Greg described, that we've got numerous countries wanting to partner with us, as well as vice versa, where American firms are going out into the world to create these new paradigms. Redwire has a Luxembourg office already. In just my first few days with the company, we've been talking about a number of international partnerships where each country can contribute different technologies, even capital, to create this dynamic new space economy of the future.
Well, thank you, Mike. And continuing on there for a moment, given your experience building partnerships, helping create these public-private partnerships, as we move forward, beyond the obvious ones of a launch and crew transport, where are the next steps where perhaps and please go ahead and be prescriptive, guys, because that's one of the things we like to do at America's Future Series, is make real recommendations about what should be done, whether it's government or whether it's commercial entities. What are the next things that NASA, frankly, should be divesting from at some level, handing over to industry, or having partnerships where it's almost a 90-10, in terms of usage versus, 90% in terms of the work goes to the industry and 10% is the usage by NASA. And then where does NASA go and the government work go from there in continuing to enable industry development the way that the last 60 years of NASA work has enabled this massive industry to finally, sprout. Maybe Mike, I can stay with you first, or if Greg, you want to jump in.
There's one point that's just a burning topic that I've been
Sure.
thinking about a lot.
Go for it.
This plays into Mike's comments on products made in space. So the opportunity to extract space resources and turn them into value commodities and bring them to Earth without hurting the Earth's biosphere is just huge. But one of the areas that we've not focused on is downmass. There's been so much focus on reducing the cost to launch, and that's already dramatically happened just by improving the manufacturing process of rockets and then by moving to reuse, refueling, et cetera. But downmass is huge. We need to be able to get that stuff back to the Earth. We need to be able to get it to the lunar surface. The pricing that we just heard from Jack at Intuitive Machines was great, but $1.25 million to the poles per kilogram isn't going to do in the long run. We've got to get things down to the surface of the moon and the Earth a lot cheaper. And there's a lot more companies should be focusing particularly on the return to the Earth for cargo of things produced in space.
Yeah, Greg's exactly correct. And it actually ties into my answer to your questions here, that as Greg had mentioned, I think some of the best money that NASA has ever spent was on CRS and COTS. That not only did we meet a substantial and dramatic NASA need relative to cargo delivery, but we got 2 new spacecraft, 2 new launch systems, 2 new capsules, both of which have obviously delivered cargo to the International Space Station, and with SpaceX led to crew capability. But not only did that meet NASA's needs, but that brought an entire market, an entire industry of commercial space launch back from overseas. America had gone from being the only country capable of commercial space launch to having only one, and sometimes no commercial launches, until we had the CRS COTS paradigm, the development of that commercial market with assistance from DARPA and others, showing how NASA and the US government as a whole, DoD, has a critical role as catalyst and as customer for these capabilities.
Right.
And in launch, we've seen a steady development where now for LEO, we have launch occurring from and by the private sector. But what's next is the commercialization of the space platforms themselves in low Earth orbit and beyond. That yes, we've got public-private partnerships for launch, but not for the platform itself. And we know how to build a space platform. The time has come to commercialize that aspect as well. NASA has already begun doing so, but this is where we really need to focus, because we cannot afford a space station gap. Not only do we need to maintain that space station to train our astronauts, to develop new technologies and capabilities and medicines, but we're not in a vacuum anymore. This month or soon, China will launch the first element of its space station. And just from a geopolitical, from a diplomatic perspective, we can't lose the American foothold with our international partners in low Earth orbit. And the private sector can help us get there. And we're so excited at Redwire, and I know throughout the commercial community, to bring our capabilities and power and robotics and generation to have a public-private partnership for habitats in low Earth orbit that then could be leveraged for habitats and capabilities to take our astronauts not only to the moon, but in the future, Mars. So this is where NASA and the US government need to go. And what they need to do is be a catalyst by becoming a customer, that they need to put forward commitments that if you create these commercial capabilities, the government will be a customer for those. And then if you create that dynamic, I really think you'll see significant investment by the private sector now.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. Not only do we need LEO stations, but we need to think about them more creatively, right? So the ISS is a one-size-fits-all solution to a space station, and therefore it's kind of suboptimal in some ways. So if you're doing really precise manufacturing or microgravity experiments, actually being on ISS is suboptimal, because you've got an astronaut on an exercise machine, and you've got docking operations and the arm and things going on that disturb the environment. So specialized stations that are only occasionally crewed or uncrewed are also important parts of the solution. We need to explore not just microgravity, but various gravity regimes. We have no idea what the long-term impact of being on Mars or the moon is to human being. We know being in microgravity for a year or so, makes Mr. Kelly pretty uncomfortable. And so we're not going to do that. But the idea that we're going to go and live permanently on Mars sounds good, but we don't know what the long-term impact of that are. We don't know whether a child can be gestated in that environment. There's a lot of things that could be done in commercial space stations that we need to explore, besides just duplicating what we have on ISS.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for those ideas. I want to shift gears a little bit, because we're talking so much about the future. The last 2 days have very much been about the future, looking forward. Yesterday, Steve Sakowitz of the Aerospace Corporation provided some amazing comments on the workforce of the future from his perspective. Given that, Greg, you've been a professor, off and on for a couple decades. And Mike, you've worked, with NASA, which fundamentally has been one of the great training grounds for aerospace professionals throughout industry. Every aerospace company seems to be dotted with people who have done everything from internships to careers at NASA. What can I ask you, gentlemen? What do you see as the key things that we need to tell and make sure that our educational institutions understand so that we can continue to capture this opportunity that you've highlighted? I mean, it's a spectacular point. The space economy brought money back to the U.S. before reshoring was a thing at all, right? This is already making it happen. So how do we continue that, and what do our educational institutions need to do to make sure that continues?
Yeah, so if you want me to jump in, one of the best things that we can do to incentivize youth and new entrants into this field is to make money. Money is very attractive. And that's why these commercialization efforts are so important. That just going back to this launch paradigm shift that we're talking about, where commercial launch came back to American shores, that got a lot of people interested. Rockets going up. I don't know if you've ever seen a rocket launch. I think you have, Zaheer. And I know Greg has. It's inspiring. And the more projects that we have that are actually happening, the more commercial work that we have. Going back to the moon is a huge inspiration. That we had a glut of STEM education and STEM professionals due to Apollo. That's trailed off. And part of that is that we haven't gone back to the moon. We haven't done the exciting things. Activities like Perseverance really inspire people. So NASA in particular has a very important role in providing that inspiration that can drive people to STEM. And then at the private sector, we have to make money, and that attracts students to the development. And then I do have to say a word on diversity, that it's so important, particularly as we look at this competition with China, where they've got a much larger pool of potential employees to draw from, that we need to take all of America with us on that journey. And that means women, and per the name of the Artemis program itself, one of the goals is to put the first female astronaut on the moon, but we also need to make sure we have sufficient females, not just on the moon, but in the engineering sector and in math. And minority participants. I'm a big Star Trek fan. There was a terrific movie about what Nichelle Nichols, the actress who played Lieutenant Uhura, did to bring in the first minority and female astronauts. And as a native Montanan, I have to say rural communities as well, that NASA has a big gap in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. We need to do more to ensure that rural communities are engaged and those students can look up in the night sky and dream about going to the stars, because we're only going to be successful if we go to the stars together.
Thank you, Mike. Greg, your thoughts, please.
What he said. Yeah, on the diversity thing, I want to make a specific acknowledgement to the fantastic efforts of the Brooke Owens Fellowship, founded by a great team of people there, and now more recently the Patty Grace Smith Fellowship, named after somebody who was one of my favorite human beings. Patty Grace, formerly head of the Office of Space Transportation at FAA, did so much for the industry, and recognizing her with a program designed to bring more African-American students into the pipeline for space is just huge. We can obviously do better, but the good thing is, as Mike noted, with the Star Trek ethos that permeates the space community, I think it's one of the most welcoming communities, and I hope we can get that message out to everybody that wants to participate. The other point I would make about academia is some institutions have been slow to get it about space. I'm going to be perfectly honest. My last business school at USC didn't get it. I tried for a long time to drag them kicking and screaming to realize that they had a booming industry in Southern California, and that we should focus in on that topic. But they and many other organizations in academia have been so focused on the Silicon Valley model and tech as they see it. I'd like to point out that from a standpoint of the benefit of America, and I don't want to be non-international, but from an American policy standpoint, space has turned a lot better value to taxpayers than tech. The money that we put into solar and the money that we put into development of AI and other technologies have not resulted in a broad distribution of job generation in the U.S. They've generated a lot of jobs for people with 140 IQ whose family can get them into Stanford, and those kids did really well, and they're going to go design the new iPhone or whatever. But the manufacturing jobs and the jobs for the vast majority of Americans across the work spectrum have been easily offshored by capitalists eager to do that. Space, on the other hand, has kind of a natural system that not only keeps it in the US, but brings those jobs into the US, like I said. So if I walk the factory floor at Rocket Lab or SpaceX or Firefly or Relativity Space, I see an incredibly diverse group of people of every sort, not just gender and racial diversity, but diversity of skills and interest, and it's a lot better family, frankly, than I see in the tech world. So I'm hoping that every academic institution begins to get it. That said, I can tell you Arizona State University and Thunderbird School of Global Management totally get it, and that's why I'm excited to be there.
Gentlemen, I want to give you guys one last question to close out. And this is, I always like to ask this either first or last, because I think it's fun. What are you super excited about right now that either you're working on or that's going to happen here shortly? I know I'm personally very excited about then this may be not that exciting to other people, but I'm very excited about looking at use cases for a lot of these different types of sensors and remote sensing surveillance platforms that are going up into orbit to really optimize how we do things for life here on Earth. What gets your juices flowing right this second? Mike, you're not muted, so let's go to you first.
So not the Red Sox with the way they've been playing. So
my Giants ain't doing much better,
yeah.
sir. I won't talk about them darn Dodgers,
Yeah,
though.
you'll get them eventually. I'll be pulling for you. Although the Sox did have a nice win last night. I would say two things, and forgive me for going with both. But as I mentioned before, the commercialization of space platforms. You know, we've commercialized and have good public-private partnerships and great industrial capability for launch. Transitioning that ethos, transitioning those partnerships to space platforms, space stations, I think is going to be as transformative, if not more so, than what occurred at launch. We're just at the beginning of that process, and the future of unleashing that private sector innovation and efficiency and developments in commercial LEO just keeps me up at night. I'm so excited. And it's so important because, again, we cannot have a space station gap, because that would undermine not only what we would do on the space station, but all of our launch capability here in the US. So I'm very excited about the opportunity. It's so important that we succeed. And then second is the combination of satellites with robotics, where we could literally have satellites that could build themselves, that can deploy themselves. I think it's going to change the very definition of what we think of as a satellite, and the capabilities that are going to be spawned from that combination. I don't think we can even imagine what the benefits are going to be as we see that combination develop more with OSAM, with orbital servicing, assembly, and manufacturing. And again, that's a revolution that we're just at the beginning with, and I could not be more excited about the future.
Spectacular. Thank you, Mike.
Well, the thing that excites me most at the moment is just policy continuity from the new administration across the space domain. For the first time in, wow, almost my lifetime, we're seeing a very clear indication that we're going to have a smooth transition of space policy, not just at NASA, but with Space Force and National Space Council being embraced by the Biden administration, and not forcing all these organizations to go through an ugly reboot and start over again. I think it's because we put them on the right foot 4 years ago, and people like Scott Pace and Administrator Bridenstine at NASA just did an incredible job. So I'm very excited about the bipartisan support for our direction in space at a policy level, and that just feeds down to a vibrant commercial and international sector. Good times.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Truly appreciate you joining us today. And you know, we're going to look forward to great things from you, Michael, at Redwire Space, and Professor Autry at Thunderbird. You know, certainly going to be looking forward to publications and continued thought leadership from you both. Best of luck moving forward. At this time, I'm going to toss it back over to Scott and David in our studio. Gentlemen,
Thank
how
you,
are you
Z.
doing?
Doing great. Appreciate your thought leadership. Appreciate your putting this panel together. Appreciate the two gentlemen providing their time, thought, their intellect, et cetera, their opinions. And that was great stuff. And we look forward, hopefully, they'll be able to come back and join us again in the future. So I appreciate your putting that together.